Nobody tells you this when you're in the middle of your pain. Nobody sits beside you in the darkest season of your life and says, what you're going through right now is not going to break you. It's going to become the most important thing you ever carry. They just tell you to heal, to move on, to get over it. But Carl Jung discovered something that completely contradicts everything we've been told about pain, about suffering, about the people who seem most broken by life. He discovered that the wound doesn't have to be the end of the story. In fact, for some people, and you might be one of them, it's only the beginning. Think about the people in your life who have helped you the most. Not the ones with perfect lives and easy answers. Not the ones who handed you advice like a pamphlet. But the ones who sat with you in the hard moments and made you feel genuinely less alone. Now think about what most of them had in common. They had been through something. Not something small, something real, something that left a mark. And because of that mark, because of that specific, personal, deeply felt wound, they knew exactly how to reach you in a way no one else could. Jung noticed this pattern everywhere he looked. In his patients, in history, in mythology, in himself. And he gave it a name, the wounded healer. Jung's own life was the first proof of his theory. By the time he was a young man, Jung had already lived through things that would have quietly destroyed most people. A distant father who died lost and defeated. A mother whose emotional instability left him never quite sure which version of her he was coming home to. A childhood so isolating that he spent years convinced he was living two separate lives. The boy the world saw, and the inner world nobody knew existed. He didn't grow up feeling chosen or special or destined for greatness. He grew up feeling fundamentally alone in a way he couldn't explain to anyone. And then something happened that changed the entire direction of his life and eventually the entire direction of modern psychology. Instead of running from that wound, he turned toward it. He spent years going into the darkest parts of his own mind, deliberately, methodically, recording what he found there, sitting with the fear and the grief and the confusion rather than numbing it or explaining it away. He called this process going into the underworld, and what he brought back from that underworld became the foundation of everything he ever taught. Here's what Jung understood that most people spend their entire lives missing. Pain that is avoided becomes a prison, but pain that is entered consciously, faced, felt, examined, becomes something else entirely. It becomes a map, not a map of suffering. A map of the human interior. A detailed, hard-earned understanding of what it actually feels like to be lost, to be broken, to be searching for something solid in the middle of complete chaos. And that map, that specific knowledge that can only be earned through living, through something, is exactly what makes certain people capable of reaching others in ways that no amount of training or education ever could. You felt this difference before, even if you didn't have words for it. You've sat across from someone who had all the right credentials, all the right language, all the clinical distance in the world, and felt absolutely nothing. Felt unseen, felt like a problem being processed rather than a person being heard. And then you've had a conversation with someone who had no credentials at all. Maybe a friend, maybe a stranger in an unexpected moment. Someone who had simply been through their own version of what you were going through. And in 5 minutes they reached something in you that years of the other kind of help never touched. That's not an accident. That's the wounded healer at work. Jung said that the healer who has never been wounded can only work from the outside. They can understand the theory of pain. They can map it and categorize it and offer frameworks for it. But the healer who has been wounded and who has done the work of facing that wound, they can go somewhere the others can't. They can go inside because they already know the way. But here is where Jung's theory gets complicated. And this is the part that most people never hear. Not every wounded person becomes a healer. Jung was very clear about this. The wound alone doesn't transform you. The wound plus avoidance just creates more damage, more patterns, more cycles of pain passing from one person to the next, from one generation to the next, dressed up in different circumstances but carrying the same unexamined core. Jung saw this too, constantly. The parent who was hurt as a child and never faced it, unconsciously recreating that same hurt in their own home. The person who was abandoned and never examined it, building every relationship on the silent foundation of that original fear. The one who was told they were too much, too sensitive, too broken, as in who internalized that verdict so completely they spent the rest of their life making themselves smaller. The wound without awareness doesn't heal you, it just finds new people to live inside. So what makes the difference? What separates the person whose pain destroys them from the person whose pain becomes their greatest source of depth, compassion, and purpose? Jung said it comes down to one thing: the willingness to go in, not around it, not over it, not through the performance of having dealt with it, into it. The willingness to sit with the actual feeling, to stop narrating the story of what happened and start feeling what it left inside you, to stop asking why did this happen to me and start asking what is this pain trying to show me about myself, about life, about what I'm actually made of. This is not a comfortable process. Jung never pretended it was. He said it was the hardest thing a human being could do, harder than any external challenge, harder than any achievement, because it requires you to face yourself without flinching, to look at the places inside you that are still raw and still scared and still unresolved, and to stay there long enough to actually understand what you find. And most people never do it, not because they're weak, but because nobody ever told them that going in was even an option. Nobody told them that the pain they've been running from their entire life wasn't a sign that something was permanently wrong with them. It was an invitation. Think about the thing you've been through that you would never wish on anyone else. The loss that changed the way you see the world. The betrayal that made you question everything you thought was solid. The season of your life that you still don't talk about at dinner tables because even now, even after everything, it sits too close to the surface. That thing. Jung would tell you that buried inside that specific experience is something that belongs only to you. A kind of knowing. A particular quality of presence. A capacity for depth that people who have never been broken open simply do not have access to. Not because suffering is romantic, it isn't. Not because pain makes you special. It doesn't. But because the human heart, when it is cracked open and when it chooses to stay open rather than armoring over, develops a sensitivity to other people's pain that is almost impossible to manufacture any other way. You know what it feels like to be at the bottom. And that knowledge, that specific embodied lived knowledge, means that when someone else finds themselves there, you don't panic. You don't look for the fastest way to fix them or move them along. You don't hand them a timeline for recovery or a list of things they should be feeling grateful for. You just sit with them, in the dark, without flinching. And for someone who has never had that, someone who has spent their whole life being told to hurry up and feel better, that presence is everything. Jung wrote about a concept he called the therapeutic relationship. He believed that real healing almost never happens in isolation. It happens in the space between two people, in the moment when one human being feels genuinely witnessed by another. And he said that the healer who has faced their own wound brings something irreplaceable into that space. They bring proof, not the spoken kind, not the motivational kind, not the kind that comes from someone who has never had a reason to doubt that things would be okay, the kind that comes from someone who has genuinely not known if they would make it, and did. That proof doesn't need to be announced. It doesn't need to be explained. It lives in the way they listen, in the way they don't rush you, in the way their eyes don't go distant when you say the hard thing out loud. It lives in their presence, and their presence says something that no words can quite carry. I have been somewhere like where you are. I know how real it is, and I'm still here. Here is something Jung observed that will completely reframe the way you see your own story. He said that the most profound healers in human history were never the ones who had the easiest lives. Look at every tradition, every culture, every era. The ones who moved people, the ones who reached people, the ones who said something that cracked the world open just slightly and let some light in. They were almost always people who had been taken apart first. Not in spite of what they went through. Because of it, the wound was never incidental to what they became. It was essential. And now I want to say something directly to you, because if you've stayed with this until now, something in this is landing somewhere specific inside you. And I don't think that's an accident. Maybe you've been carrying something for a long time. Something you've gotten very good at functioning alongside. Something you've built a whole life around without ever actually sitting down and looking at directly. Maybe you've wondered what it was for. Why you specifically? Why this specific kind of pain, this specific loss, this specific version of hard? Jung's answer, and it took him a lifetime of work to be able to say this clearly, was that the question isn't why did this happen to me? The question is, what am I going to do with what this made me? because the wound already happened. That part of the story is written. But what comes next? What you build from the wreckage, what you learn to carry, what you eventually become capable of offering to another human being who is standing exactly where you once stood, that part is still open. That part is entirely yours. The wounded healer doesn't heal because they figured out how to be unaffected. They heal because they figured out how to be fully affected and keep going anyway. They learned to hold space for darkness because they once lived inside it. They learned to sit with uncertainty because certainty was taken from them. They learned to love people in their most broken states because they know what it felt like to need exactly that kind of love, and not always find it. And they learned, slowly, painfully, and completely, that the most damaged parts of themselves were never evidence of their weakness. They were the very source of their strength. Jung spent the final years of his life returning to this idea again and again. That wholeness was never about becoming someone who had no wounds. It was about becoming someone who had learned to carry their wounds without being defined by them, without passing them on unconsciously, without letting them quietly run the show from the shadows. He believed that a person who has done this work, who has gone into their pain, faced what they found there, and integrated it into who they are, becomes something that the world genuinely needs. Not a perfect person, a real one. Someone who has earned the right to sit with other people in their hardest moments, not because they have all the answers, but because they have been somewhere real, and they came back. So if your life has been hard, if you carry something heavy that most people around you cannot see, I want you to hear this. You are not behind. You are not broken beyond repair. You are not the exception to the possibility of healing. You are exactly the kind of person Jung spent his entire career writing about. The one whose deepest wound becomes their greatest gift. Not someday, not after everything is finally resolved and the pain is completely gone. But now, in the middle of it, in the carrying of it, in the quiet, unannounced, deeply human act of refusing to let what happened to you become the only thing that defines you. Your wound is not the end of your story. It never was. It is the very thing that makes your story worth telling. And if something in this reached you, if some part of this felt less like a video and more like something you needed to hear today, and sit with that, because that feeling is exactly where it begins.